Fleetwood Mac was on top of the world until one song detonated the band from within. Go Your Own Way wasn't just a breakup anthem. It was Lindsey Buckingham's public message to Stevie Nicks, recorded while 3 romances shattered, and the studio became a war zone fueled by miles of cocaine. That single track nearly destroyed them, yet turned them into legends. So, how did the most toxic song in rock history leave its target singing backup and create an album that changed music forever? Under the glare of studio lights in early 1976, Fleetwood Mac was no longer just a band. They were 5 people trying to survive the fallout of 2 imploding romances. Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks had ended their relationship in the months before the Rumours sessions began. Years of shared struggle, first as a duo, then as the band's newest stars, had given way to arguments and icy silences. Their breakup wasn't private. It played out in rehearsal rooms, hotel corridors, and eventually every note they recorded together. Across the studio, John and Christine McVie's marriage was dissolving after 8 years. Christine had started seeing the band's lighting director, and John retreated behind his bass in a wall of detachment. Communication between them shrank to the bare minimum needed to get through a take. The band's rhythm section, once anchored by a married couple, now moved in parallel, rarely touching the same emotional ground. The collapse of these 2 relationships didn't just hang in the air, it seeped into every part of the recording process. Sessions stretched late into the night, with band members arriving and leaving at odd hours to avoid each other. Producer Ken Kalott recalled the tension as constant, describing the atmosphere as drama. Arguments erupted in the control room, sometimes over a lyric, sometimes over nothing at all. When the red light went on, the fighting stopped, but the pain lingered in the music. The emotional fallout became creative ammunition. Buckingham poured his frustration and heartbreak into new material, channeling anger into chord progressions and lyrics that cut close to the bone. Nicks, forced to harmonize with the man she'd just left, brought her own wounded pride to every session. The McVies, meanwhile, tried to keep their distance, but their heartbreak surfaced in Christine's melodies and John's bass lines. By the time the band began tracking what would become their biggest album, the studio had become a pressure cooker. Every song was a battleground, every harmony tinged with bitterness and longing. The dual breakups didn't just threaten the band's future, they became the raw material that powered their greatest work. In the months ahead, those fractured loves would drive the band to the edge, setting the stage for a song that would turn private pain into public legend. Mick Fleetwood paced the corridor outside the control room, numb with the news he had just received. In the middle of the Rumours sessions, he learned that his wife, Jenny Boyd, was having an affair with one of his closest friends. For Fleetwood, who had spent years holding the band together through lineup changes and financial disasters, this was a personal blow that left him reeling. He did not collapse or lash out. Instead, he returned to his drum kit, channeling shock and confusion into every take, his playing growing more urgent and unpredictable. The studio, already thick with resentment and heartbreak, now braced for another fracture. Christine McVie later called the atmosphere drama, a phrase that barely hints at the daily reality. The air in Sausalito's record plant was heavy with suspicion. No one trusted anyone else. Every conversation felt loaded, every sideways glance a possible accusation. John McVie, still nursing the wounds from Christine's new relationship, kept to himself, his bass line steady but distant. Christine, caught between old loyalties and new love, poured her turmoil into the keyboard, her melodies sounding both hopeful and haunted. Producer Ken Kalott remembered the band's mood swinging wildly, sometimes within a single afternoon. Arguments flared over trivial details, an echo here, a lyric there, then faded into icy silence. When the fighting got too loud, someone would disappear for hours, returning only when the clock demanded another take. The only thing that seemed to unite them was the music itself. As soon as the red light blinked on, the band snapped into focus, their pain and anger pressed into the grooves of each song. But the pressure never let up. The constant grind of sessions, the relentless expectations, and the ever-present cocaine kept everyone on edge. Fleetwood's Heartbreak added a new layer of volatility, a reminder that no one in the band was safe from betrayal. The emotional balance was gone. Every member was now carrying fresh scars, and the music began to reflect that rawness. In this crucible of hurt and suspicion, the final ingredients fell into place for something explosive. The room was primed for a creative detonation, one that would arrive not as a reconciliation, but as a song written with the intent to wound. A battered cassette recorder sat on a table in a rented Florida beach house, humming with the sound of Lindsey Buckingham's frustration. He gripped his acoustic guitar and hammered out a jagged chord progression, voice raw and unfiltered. The words tumbled out half-formed, sometimes replaced by sharp, wordless shouts. What took shape wasn't a song in the usual sense. It was a direct transmission from heartbreak to tape. The lyric that would become infamous, "Packing up, shacking up is all you want to do," landed with the force of a personal accusation aimed squarely at Stevie Nicks. Even in its earliest form, the message was unmistakable. Producer Ken Kalott would later recall hearing that demo for the first time. He found it almost unmusical, more of a cathartic outburst than a finished idea. Buckingham's strumming bordered on violent, his voice straining past melody into something closer to a scream. The cassette captured every scrape and echo, the room's emptiness amplifying the sense of isolation. Kalott doubted there was anything to salvage. But Buckingham was relentless. He insisted the song had to be heard, that it needed to be as honest and as brutal as he felt. The song's structure grew out of that emotional turbulence. Instead of smoothing the edges, Buckingham sharpened them. The rhythm stumbled and surged, echoing the volatility between him and Nicks. The lyrics, especially the contentious line about shacking up, were never softened. Nicks, hearing the demo, was furious. She pleaded for the line to be changed, arguing that it twisted the truth and exposed private wounds. Buckingham refused. For him, the pain was the point. As the band prepared to bring the song into the studio, its origins were no secret. The demo had already set the tone. This was not a plea for reconciliation, but a declaration of independence carved out of anger. The rest of Fleetwood Mac braced themselves. They weren't just tracking another album cut. They were about to record a musical confrontation, one that would force everyone in the room to choose how much of their own pain they could bear to put on tape. Stevie Nicks stood in the isolation booth, headphones pressed tight, the studio glass separating her from the control room where Lindsey Buckingham listened in silence. The track rolling in her ears was unmistakable. His voice, clipped and urgent, delivering lines that felt less like lyrics and more like accusations. She had pleaded with him to change them, especially the one that cut deepest. "Packing up, shacking up is all you want to do." The answer had been no. The line stayed. Now she was expected to provide the harmony that would make the chorus soar. There was no crowd to witness the moment, just the hum of the tape machine and the low murmur of producers Ken Kalott and Richard Deschute behind the glass. Nicks took a breath and sang, blending her voice beneath Buckingham's lead, matching his intensity note for note. Every pass through the chorus felt like reopening a wound. Years later, she would describe the experience with a single, unguarded phrase. "It was like a knife in the heart, but I sang it anyway. I wanted it to be a hit record." The professionalism Nicks brought to those takes was its own kind of defiance. She didn't flinch from the pain or let it show in her performance. Instead, she layered her harmonies with precision, giving the song the brightness and lift that made it unforgettable. Engineers later recalled her focus, the way she would close her eyes and lose herself in the melody, even as the words pressed against her pride. Buckingham, listening from the other side of the glass, insisted on keeping every sharp edge. The more Nix pushed back, the more determined he became to preserve the song's raw honesty. The rest of the band stayed out of the line of fire, their own battles put on hold for the duration of the session. Christine McVie would later say that what happened in those vocal overdubs was some of the bravest singing she'd ever witnessed. When the final take was captured, Nick stepped out of the booth, face unreadable. The session log marked the time and date, but not the cost. The harmonies she delivered would become one of the song's defining features, woven so tightly with Buckingham's lead that the pain became inseparable from the sound. In that moment, the line between personal humiliation and professional triumph blurred. Nix had sung her own heartbreak into rock history, turning a private wound into something millions would hear and never forget. Ken Kalott hunched over the mixing console, headphones clamped tight, searching for a way to salvage the day's work. The band's personal feuds had forced the engineers into new territory. With tempers flaring and band members refusing to share a room, almost every element of Go Your Own Way had to be built piece by piece. Overdubs became the norm. Vocals, guitars, even some drum fills were layered in isolation, then stitched together on tape. Lindsey Buckingham, never satisfied, demanded dozens of guitar takes, each with a slightly different edge. His vision for the song called for a collision of sounds. The acoustic guitar hammered so hard it nearly distorted, then doubled with a snarling electric line, both fighting for space in the mix. The technical strain matched the emotional one. As the weeks dragged on, the 24-track tape reels began to wear thin. One night in Miami, Kalott noticed a dullness creeping into the drum tracks. The culprit was clear. The oxide coating on the master tape was literally flaking off from overuse. With every playback, pieces of the music were being erased. Panic set in. The risk wasn't just lost time, but the loss of the entire song. The engineers scrambled, baking the tapes at low heat to stabilize them, then transferring the surviving overdubs onto backup reels. It was a race against chemistry and chance. Even when the machines cooperated, the human element rarely did. Kalott and his team spent hours comping takes, splicing together the sharpest guitar phrases and most honest vocal lines, sometimes from sessions days apart. The relentless overdubbing, the technical crises, and the need to patch together fractured performances became the only way to finish the track. By the time the final mix came together, Go Your Own Way was both a technical patchwork and an emotional one. Its sound shaped as much by tape repairs and studio ingenuity as by the bruised hearts behind the music. Studio hospitality logs from the Rumours sessions read like coded warnings. Expenses for refreshments and supplies ballooned far beyond the usual coffee and sandwiches. The phrase "several miles of cocaine" became a running joke among the crew, but the reality was anything but funny. Producers and engineers watched as the drug-fueled wild mood swings, driving the band from manic bursts of energy to sudden, crushing exhaustion. Arguments that started over a missed harmony or a late arrival could spiral out of control, only to be forgotten hours later in a haze of chemical bravado. Ken Kalott and Richard Dashut, the engineers tasked with keeping the sessions on track, found themselves improvising new ways to salvage takes abandoned mid-song. Some nights, the band would arrive in the early evening, riding a wave of euphoria. The next morning, they would be slumped in corners, barely speaking, their nerves shot. The constant push and pull of cocaine kept the creative engine running, but it also left everyone raw and unpredictable. Crew members learned to spot the signs, a burst of laughter that turned to shouting, a sudden silence that meant someone had stormed out. Tension seeped into every layer of the music. Overdubs were interrupted by slammed doors and muffled arguments. Sometimes, tracks were pieced together from half-finished takes, the energy of one moment stitched to the exhaustion of another. The studio became its own ecosystem, running on adrenaline and powder, where the only constant was the chaos. For the engineers, the cost was measured not just in blown tape reels and lost hours, but in the toll it took on everyone in the room. The music that emerged from this frenzy carried every ounce of that volatility, restless, brilliant, and always on the edge of collapse. On December 20th, 1976, Go Your Own Way hit radio stations across the US and began its climb up the charts. By March of the following year, the single had reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, holding its spot among the top 10 for 2 weeks and staying on the chart for a total of 15. The momentum didn't stop there. Rumours, powered by the single's success and the band's unraveling story, shot to number 1 on the Billboard 200. The album would stay at the top for 31 non-consecutive weeks, an almost unheard-of run. As sales soared and radio play intensified, Fleetwood Mac found themselves at the center of a cultural moment. The industry took notice too. In February 1978, Rumours was awarded the Grammy for Album of the Year, cementing both the band and the song's place in music history. Mick Fleetwood would later look back on those months and admit the band came dangerously close to unraveling. In interviews, he described the cost with a kind of weary honesty. It was very nearly the whole thing falling apart. The success of Go Your Own Way and Rumours brought fame and fortune, but Fleetwood never pretended the price was easy to pay. He saw how the raw hostility that drove the sessions left scars not just on relationships, but on each member's sense of self. The band's greatest music, he said, was born from moments when everything threatened to break. There's a power in that kind of honesty, a force that can turn pain into something lasting. But Fleetwood never lost sight of the toll. For every radio hit, there was a night spent wondering if the band would survive to see the next morning. The ledger was never simple, and the wounds never fully healed. On December 20th, 1976, Fleetwood Mac released Go Your Own Way, a single forged in the aftermath of 3 breakups and months of relentless pressure. The band's personal turmoil, documented in studio logs, interview transcripts, and producer Ken Kailat's first-hand accounts, shaped every note and lyric. Stevie Nicks described having to sing on her own public heartbreak as a real knife in the side, while the recording nearly collapsed under technical crises and what crew later called several miles of cocaine. Despite these obstacles, the song propelled Rumours to 31 weeks at number 1 and earned the band a Grammy. Yet the full emotional toll remains impossible to measure. Private conversations and unresolved feelings are absent from the public record. What is clear through chart data and critical rankings is that the conflict behind Go Your Own Way turned Fleetwood Mac's deepest wounds into a legacy. As Mick Fleetwood later reflected, their raw honesty came at a cost, but it made them legends.